This is the last lecture on the topic of death and dying, and this one I just have a couple topics left. We got the topic of bereavement and grief and the end of life ritual, and then I've stuck in a slide about things not to say when someone has experienced a loved one. So basically, what your textbook discusses here or points out is that there's a difference between bereavement and grief. Bereavement is simply the acknowledgement. The bereaved is the person who is dealing with the death, and there can be lots of bereaved people. There can be the children or the spouse, the sister or whatever, right? So that's what bereave. And then grief refers to the emotional experience associated with being bereaved, right? Associated with having gone through this experience. And, I don't know how many end of life rituals you all have been a part of, but certainly our culture does the traditional funeral, which is expensive. If you've ever looked, oh, I should ask you to do that, right? Look at what does a casket cost. It can cost thousands and thousands of dollars, as opposed to say cremation, or which is also expensive, and that can be influenced by what kind of urn you have and where you sell. Of course, right now under social distancing, we're not having the traditional funeral. Some families are able to have a graveside service with a handful of people, and they can remain in distance. And I just I can't imagine what this must be like for the now 50,000 Americans who've now died. That's the whole city of Manhattan, friends. That is that is the 24,000 college students and the 25,000 people that live here year round. That's the whole city of Manhattan. And imagine trying to find a place to bury all those people. In New York, who've had 20,000 deaths that they're putting not in mass, just short of mass graves, but they're in plain wooden boxes, and they're lining these boxes up side by side, digging one hole, lining these people up side by side because there are so many people to bury. And people aren't allowed to have funerals. There's no rites of passage. So you're sending your loved one to the hospital, and that's the last you see of them in person. Well, of course, I'm sure if you're watching the news, you're aware of these stories. But I remember my husband and I watching a news story the other day about this, and we just like looked at each other. I just can't imagine how scary that would be for both the person that's dying and to know. Just anyway, okay, but so we got the funeral. It can be very expensive. This is a traumatic time. A lot of people will pay for their funeral in advance. I've noticed a lot more funeral commercials on funeral home commercials on TV. Then there's other faiths. There's other traditions. There's the sitting the Shiva, which is where it's associated with Jewish people, and they cover the mirrors and they wear black, and people, I forget how many days. I want to say it's 7 days, but don't quote me on that. And people come to their home and visit them. This is their grieving process. And some, they do what's called a funeral pyre. Sounds like fire. That's what's on the front here, and it's an open public cremation. So the loved one is usually wrapped, and they're buried in an open space, often with
It's 12 o'clock.
often with plants that have a fragrant plants. I know when we were in Trinidad and Tobago out on the beach, there was a place where people were having their funeral pyres. There's something called and I just saw it on here. Oh, fiddlesticks. Oh, a suti. And I may probably pronouncing all these wrongs, but a suti is a ritual where the widow, usually it's a woman, she will throw herself on the funeral pyre, because in these cultures where women have no status, absent of their husband, when their husband dies, they effectively, it's like committing suicide or taking one's life, ending one's life by death by suicide. Um, so different cultures have different rituals. I know that it wasn't all that long ago where women were only wore black after their husband died, so they would dye their clothes black. There are some cultures might put like a symbol on their front door that they're dealing with grief and grief, with dealing with bereavement. They are bereaving in this house. Anyway, so different cultures. And I guess the question that I might ask you is, how many funerals have you been to? Have you ever been to a wake, right? So a wake is commonly, we use the term wake a lot. I have only been to one true wake where it was really more of a celebration. It was truly a party and not a solemn, quiet sort of experience. In this case, he was actually our family, our marriage counselor, and it was honest to goodness a party, and it was held at the Alumni Center. They had live music, they had open bar, they had dancing, and all around the room were various food stations. One food station had, like, his name was Tony. One food station had the food that was in Tony's freezer, right? His favorite snack foods. One food station had the food when he went home to New York that he ate there. One was his favorite vacation spot. It was truly, truly a party. But that was the only one I've ever been to like that. I've been to some that call themselves awake, but were really more sort of somber and funeral-esque. So another question to consider is, what kind of celebration do you want? Do you want traditional? I think this is actually one of the questions in the assignment is, do you want a solemn sort of funeral? Do you want, how many, do you want a casket burial? Do you want a cremation? Do you want to be married in one of those tree pods, which I don't know that we can get in Kansas? I do believe we have one green burial cemetery in Kansas, and that is where you have to be buried in a biodegradable box or a biodegradable container, and you cannot be embalmed. Right. Embalming, if you don't know, requires the draining of all of your body fluids and filling your body cavity, or refilling those spaces with I think it's formaldehyde, with a preservative. So effectively, what you do when you embalm someone is you preserve them, and then you put them in a casket, and then we put them in a vault. So yeah, they're going to be there for the long term. A friend of mine wanted to bury her husband at her house, and she ran into a lot of regulations. I think those are county or state health regulations about where you can bury people. You can't pretty much put somebody in your backyard anymore. Used to be able to. Okay, moving on. Okay, so then the next box there, this is the last topic, or the last box I want to draw your attention to. It just, it offers some things to say. So when some things not to say, for instance, don't say, I know how you feel, if you have not experienced the same thing that they have. Or something about they're in a better place. These are not necessarily the best things to say. I have adopted a statement where you say, and it goes along with this concept of bereavement, I acknowledge your pain. Because after all, what are you trying to do? You know, when you're expressing sympathy to somebody, so the difference between sympathy and empathy, right? When someone is suffering, you want them to know that you are thinking about them. So instead of saying, I know how you feel, why don't we just say, I want you to know that I'm thinking about you during this time. So something like, I acknowledge your pain. I see your suffering. I'm thinking about you. Because after all, that's what you're trying to say. Instead of saying, and certainly avoid things like, it's going to be okay, because that's not comforting. But what we do know about the human spirit is that they want someone to notice, to be seen, as they say. So that offers some things to say and things not to say for the bereaved. And this wraps up this very short chapter on death and dying. Actually, this wraps up our whole semester. So look for the assignment below and the discussion posts. And thank you for listening.